All right. Well, thank you so much for doing this. Why don't you tell the audience how we know each other?
So I believe it was fifth grade, right? I was
Yep.
in your fifth grade class. Was I your first
You
class?
were my first year. Yep. As you know, I've been touching base with former students and asking them about what they wish they would have learned more about in school or
Hmm.
touched upon more deeply. So why don't you go ahead and start us off?
My original answer is actually, I wish bullying, and more specifically bullying against LGBT students, was more
Mhm.
talked about in school. Um, but the more I think about it, the more I think it relates more to I wish I learned about LGBT history. In turn, that would have maybe decrease the amount of bullying I experience because I
Do you
am a
mind?
transgender male. So, you know, I was very different growing up. Wasn't the same as all the other girls in my class. So I was very much picked on for that because it was unusual for my fellow peers, my fellow students to see that. So,
Do you mind walking us through or talking to us a little bit about what that experience was like when you were in fifth grade, sixth grade, seventh grade?
I mean, I had no vocabulary or knowledge of the LGBT community at that time.
Mhm.
I knew people could be gay,
Mhm.
but that didn't identify with who I was. Um, I think it was my sophomore year in high school, or maybe my junior year in high school, when I first learned like who transgender people were, that you could live your life like this, that this was an option for people.
Mhm.
Um, so in fifth grade, and I mean even back into preschool, I can remember never understanding why I was always put in the female category, but
Okay.
I knew that to some extent I didn't truly fit into the male category. But it
Right.
just didn't make sense to me. I didn't know anything about it. I remember in preschool when we play house, and I was always like, I'll be the father, I'll be the brother, I'll be the son. And like people, my friends back then thought it was a little odd, but they just let me do it because they
Mhm.
didn't know any better either. So it was from a very young age that I knew something was off. But going through school, I was a tomboy. I was always wearing like my
Mhm.
brother's hand-me-down clothes. I cut my hair short for the first time in first grade, and since then it's been super short. Um, and I just acted differently than all the other girls. So that those were all very obvious things for other people to pick on.
Right.
And it was just constant comments of, you're weird, you're different,
Mhm.
you don't fit in and things like that. And always feeling like I didn't fit in because I didn't fit in with who I thought I was, on top of
Mm.
not fitting in school. There was never a year in school where I wasn't picked on, where I didn't have somebody that was my bully. Um,
Mm.
and it was, and I mean, like, I would talk to the teachers about it. I would go to like the guidance counselor, and I felt like it was constant meetings with the guidance counselor and the person who was bullying me, and them saying, "Oh, well, you shouldn't do that. It's not very nice." And then that was kind of really it. It didn't really go any further.
Right.
Um, but I think at the same time, during that time, it wasn't. I don't think schools or guidance counselors or teachers or educators are really at that point in time like aware of like what they could do for a student like myself who,
Right.
I mean, I know that my teachers saw that I was being picked on, and they did everything that they could, that they knew how to
Mhm.
do, to help me feel
Mhm.
more comfortable and feel
Mhm.
safe in my classes. But I don't think the resources were there for them to truly
Right.
like understand like I can do this and I can help
Right.
you in this way.
And I don't wanna come across like all of a sudden because it's popular or cool to sound
Hmm.
like you're woke about certain issues. I think there's still a lot of confusion. There's a lot
Hmm.
of things, topics, terms that I think
Hmm.
are unclear to a lot of educators as well as other students.
I definitely agree with that. And I also, on top of all that, it's to a lot of people, they consider it controversial.
Mhm.
They don't want their children to be, maybe they don't want their kids to be learning about these things because
Mhm.
then they might fear that, you know,
What do
their
you
own
think what do
child
you
would
think the
identify.
reason is for the controversy?
I really think it's fear.
Mhm.
I genuinely think they are just afraid of that because my experience with people who have, I don't want to say attacked me, but
You
like
can if that's how you
verbally,
feel.
Yeah, that is true. So like my experience with people who have attacked me about the way that I live my life and how I choose to be as just a person,
Yeah.
they I feel like they're afraid of me. Like I'm threatening to them. And so I really think people who don't agree and are not accepting
Mhm.
and feel that what how I'm living my life is wrong, and they are afraid of how I'm living my life. And I don't exactly understand why they feel that fear or
Okay.
why they feel that it's threatening.
Mhm.
Um, I think it's to them it's threatening their ideal.
Mm.
So I think the controversial part of it is coming out of fear. Um,
So, if there was something you wish your classmates, your teachers would understand or could at least start with understanding, what would that be?
it would just be respect. Just
Mm.
respect that person. Because if
Mhm.
I would hope that if you respect that person enough, you will just respect that they will live their life how they will, and that they
Right.
won't come at you and harm you or anything like that. I think just when you start with respect, then you kind of open up the door to understanding.
Mm.
You respect the person enough to sit down with them and have a conversation about it. You respect the person enough to listen to what they're telling you, because
Mhm.
they're sharing a very vulnerable part of themselves with
Yes.
other people. And
Yes.
it's vulnerable because in history they have been, murdered and attacked and, just discriminated against on every level. So starting with respect, going back to that, starting with
Yes.
respect, um, allows so many other things to fall into place to start to feel like this is a safe space for me to be. These are people that I can go to and I can talk to and that I can just be around, and not worry about myself.
For sure.
Mhm.
So, what does respect look like to you in the classroom?
When I think back to being in school, it was respect, for me would have been feeling like I'm equal to everybody else in my class. That,
Mm.
I'm not walking into the room and everybody looks up and stares at me because
Mm.
I'm different. I'm included when you do group projects. I'm not sitting there knowing that nobody else is going to pick me to be in their group and that the teacher is going to have to put me in somebody's group.
Mm.
That's respect of just treating me like how you treat everybody else in your
Right.
class.
Right.
To me, that's respect in the classroom.
So, what would you include in our curriculum or conversation in order to feel, again, respected?
It's hard because there is history, but it's not well documented,
Right.
because it's things that people wanted to hide and keep secret and not let people know about because it didn't it didn't align with their agenda. History for the LGBT community, I feel really doesn't start until probably like 60, 50 years ago. And so that
Mhm.
that would be something new to add into the curriculum.
Mhm.
And these would be like the protests, the marches, all of the, activists who have been very loud and very upfront in all of these movements of, just treat us equally, give us equal rights, protect
Mhm.
our rights.
Mhm.
Um, so things like that. And it's a depressing history because a lot of these people
Most
have
history is.
well, yeah, that is true. Yeah, the U.S. history is a very depressing history. But it's a lot of really uncovering, um, how discriminated against the LGBT community
Do
was
you
and still is. I'm still learning a
Mhm.
lot about, different identities and different pronouns and things like that. If you think of, for example, a lot of like for autism, there's a spectrum. It is fluid. There's
Yes.
never like you are right here on the autism spectrum. Same
Right.
thing with gender and gender identity. It is a
Mhm.
spectrum. It is very fluid. And
Mhm.
I know people who feel more feminine on some days and more masculine on other days, and they will present based off of whichever one they feel on any given day. So it's a very fluid just identity.
When it comes to awareness, when addressing a student a certain way or an individual
Mhm.
a certain way, how would someone else know which way they are feeling, particularly on that day, or is that not even the issue at all?
people really appreciate is if you when you meet someone new
Mhm.
and you say, "Hi, my name is Zach. What is your name?" And then
Mhm.
they tell you their name. You go, "What are your pronouns?"
Mm.
You can ask them straight up, "What are your
Mhm.
pronouns?" And they will
Mhm.
tell you he, his, she, hers, they, them.
Okay.
They will tell you because they don't want to be misgendered. And being misgendered is being, for me, if somebody came up to me and referred to me with female pronouns.
And then in
Hmm.
conversations I've had, if I'm being frank with a lot of
Hmm.
people, this is a relatively new conversation amongst educators and even just, personally. I think what I'm seeing and hearing is some confusion on how one, might be born one way but feels
Hmm.
differently. And not that you represent your whole community, obviously, because
Hmm.
as you just said, it
Yeah.
is a spectrum. But from your own
Hmm.
experience, because our purpose here is to try and have an open conversation and bring understanding and light to the topic, how would you address that?
For me specifically, I have never thought of myself as female. From my earliest memories, I was never like, yes, I am a girl.
So when your
No.
parents addressed you as formerly Emily,
Hmm.
w- you would feel what?
I, that was my name. I didn't know. I knew that everyone perceived me as female, and my name was Emily, and
Okay.
that people would use female pronouns. I
Okay.
didn't know that I could change anything about it, so I accepted that fact. I was
Got
like,
it.
that's how it's gonna be. So
Okay.
I came to terms with that. And so before I came out to myself as transgender, I was just going to live my life in the female category because I didn't know I could do any different. And that's just what I was given. I couldn't do
Mhm.
anything about it at that time. Um, it wasn't until I started coming out to my family and my friends, um, that I was very aware of when I was talking to somebody and they would be talking to me or they would be talking to somebody else about me and they would stutter and switch pronouns. I was
Mm,
very aware then that, like, oh wow, like female pronouns really do not feel good, I guess,
mm.
is a way that I can describe it.
Okay.
It just felt
Off.
wrong. Yeah, it felt off.
So that's one thing that I hear in conversation. And the other is about, I think there's a fear, especially when you're talking about young children, that they're
Hmm.
going to be influenced to become transgender.
I will just say that there is nothing that could have ever influenced me to be anything other than myself. The
Mm,
only thing that could have influenced me would have been me.
mm,
That's it. Like there is no outside anything. Nobody could tell me otherwise. Really how it was. And once I educated myself on people who are transgender, how to live a transgender life, what are your options and what are the resources?
mm,
It was like the final puzzle piece was put in place that, I have been missing my entire life. I sat down at my computer and Google searched, I am a
mm,
girl, why do I feel like a boy?
mm.
Because it just got to the point of like, I don't understand what I'm
What's
feeling. I have
going
no
on?
idea what this is. I know nobody around me is going to understand this. So
Mm.
I turned to Google as, the internet child that I am, and and found my answer. And I
Yeah,
read the in transgender, the word transgender popped up. The definition was right underneath it, and I was just like, "Oh
that
my gosh!"
that's
Like
me.
that summarizes everything that I've been feeling for the past like
Mm.
15 years. So it was a huge relief, and then that just snowballed into looking up everything about transgender people.
In addition to just obviously encouraging respect, which of course we try to do, talking about what is your pronoun, what is your preferred pronoun,
Mhm.
what would you recommend for educators to start doing or at least introducing so that everybody feels protected and like they're not being stifled?
I think for me when I was growing up in school, I felt like it was very much just two genders, and it was blue was for boys, pink was for girls. And
Mm,
anytime I feel like we did a lot of activities, in the class, there were a few occasions where it was like all the boys stand on this side of the room, all the girls stand
mm.
on this side of the room. And then I was very much the oddball out on the girl side of the room, not looking like I belonged
Some of
there.
that's very deeply ingrained in us too, because it's very normal for us to be like,
Hmm.
okay, boys and girls, let's go and do
Yeah,
this, you know,
yeah.
and things like that. So I thought about that, and I thought about I imagine in PE class, which I don't know if they do that anymore, because now I think they do like, okay, red shirts and blue shirts, you know, that kind of thing,
Hmm.
which I think is great. I think it's a much better
Hmm.
strategy anyway, as opposed to
Absolutely.
how you look or what you know, what your gender may be. I imagine this is nothing I say to you is going to be new, especially since you've Googled it already.
Yeah.
I
Hmm.
can just hear people, even just once I post this interview, you know, feeling as if, oh, well, now you're encouraging others to, you know, be X, Y, or Z way. How do you
Hmm.
counter that?
Like I said, for myself, there is nothing that anybody could have ever said that would have changed my mind. Educate yourself. That's the really the only thing I want to encourage. I
Yeah,
want you to educate yourself.
right.
Because if you were like me and you didn't understand the feelings that you had and
What's
you
the
went to Google,
yeah,
then you might find your answer, you might not. And
right.
maybe, you're just a little bit confused and then you come to terms with, I am who I am and that makes me happy. And if that makes you happy, then that's all that matters.
What's the danger in not talking about this? Let's say we keep, you know, kind of shoving it under the rug. What do you think the
Hmm.
problem is there?
You're allowing people to create their own assumptions
Mm,
that are uneducated and ignorant.
not based on
And exactly. And that becomes dangerous because then they might act on it and they might
fact.
say, this is not how you live your life. Whatever assumption that they have created that they believe is true.
Mhm. But what about even what the individual experiences themselves? How does that put them at risk if we just don't acknowledge it?
If you look at the statistics of attempted suicide and suicide rates amongst the LGBT community and specifically transgender community, for the transgender community, it's about 41%.
That's high.
Before I think it's before the age of 26. I might be wrong on that age, but it's like before the age of like 26, 25 or something like that. It is incredibly high. And if
Mhm.
we I feel like if it's not something that we talk about and people who are having these feelings and these thoughts feel like I can't talk about this with anybody. They
Mm,
feel incredibly isolated
mm.
and it spirals down into a very dark place, and I would say that those numbers would greatly increase.
How do you feel about this statement that, you know, especially coming from a more religious perspective,
Mhm.
because I do think religion comes into play here for a lot of folks.
It's
Mhm,
literally in the Bible. Love thy
mhm,
neighbor as they
mhm,
are.
mhm,
That's it. If people want to use religion as their shield, then you need to use the scriptures that you believe in.
mm,
That's it. There's nowhere in I have never found in the Bible that says like,
mm,
if somebody is different, then you need to they need to be outcasted and,
mm,
shunned, and you need to execute them or something. Like I've
mm,
never that's the Bible for me. Religion and scriptures and the Bible are all about accepting and loving and being a good person and
mm,
helping people out when you
mm,
can. That's, I feel, the core beliefs and the core values of
mm.
majority of religion.
So, are there any particular instances that stand out to you of what you experienced that you really feel like could have easily been prevented?
Absolutely. The first thing that popped into my mind was I think this was eighth grade. Um, I had two language art periods, and in between those periods was lunch. And so
Okay.
we would go back to the classroom, wait outside the classroom for our language arts teacher to come back, and then we'd go back into class. So it was the entire class standing in the hallway, waiting for the teacher to get back. I was sitting on a desk and I was talking to my friend, and the guy who was bullying me for the last 2 years was standing on the other side of the hallway, and he was whispering something to one of my other friends. My
Mm,
friend walked up to me, he told me what he said, And it was
Mm,
some quite disturbing things, surprisingly, for an eighth grader to say. Um, and there were absolutely no teachers, no school staff anywhere to be found in this entire hallway. And
mm,
I'm pretty sure even in the hallways that were connecting to it, there was no adults there. And
mm,
so I remember just seeing red after I was told what he was saying about me. And
mm, mm.
I pushed him up against the locker and I was gonna fight him, but then I was like, this is wrong. There's too much going on. This is very overwhelming. And I
Yeah.
left.
Mm,
And I walked out of the hallway and I walked down one of the other hallways, still no teachers, no one. I I went straight to the principal's office because I couldn't find a single teacher anywhere. I couldn't find
wow.
anybody. And so I feel like, and again, these are a lot of the things that I feel should have been in place when I was in school. It's a lot of extra work for the people who work in schools and teachers and educators. It's a
Mm,
lot of work on top of the enormous amount of work that you guys already do. So it's difficult to do these things. It's difficult to add and add and add and add all these things
yeah.
onto your responsibilities. Um, but I wish that, somebody was around.
Of
I
course.
wish
Of
somebody
course.
was there for
Yeah.
me to just, instead of going and literally attacking him, I put
Yeah.
my hands on him.
Yeah.
Instead of me going to do that because I didn't have an adult to turn to,
Yeah.
I wish there was somebody there. Um,
Understandably, yeah. There should have been.
yeah, yeah. So that was something that probably was my very first experience in school where it was like the vice principal who doesn't really know me. This is like my
Right.
first time talking to, the vice
Yeah.
principal, is already very aware of the situation. And
And
I
supportive, it
think
seemed like.
exactly, yeah. Like she knew where I was coming from
Mm.
based off of my actions and what was going on. It's just I wish there was somebody there for me to turn to.
And isn't that such a symbolic answer in so many ways?
Hmm. Yeah,
So many of us
absolutely.
feel like that as kids, especially. We just
Hmm.
wish someone was there when you
Yeah,
need them to be there. Wasn't
but
there an incident you mentioned with a teacher?
yes, actually, there was. I was in eighth grade. This is the same year. Um, I had several assignments that I was pretty sure I did. And now
Mhm.
I'm a forgetful person.
Okay.
I'm not all that organized. So, I was like, okay, maybe I really didn't do these assignments that I was getting zeros for. And then there was a pretty big project that I actually worked on with my dad at home. And when I got my report card back and it said there was a zero, my dad was
Mm,
like, "Did you not turn this in?" And I was like, "No, I definitely turned it in."
mhm,
And so my dad and my mom had a parent teacher conference with a teacher.
mhm. Right.
And my dad was like, "I did this assignment with my child. They told me they turned it in. It is not in their backpack. It's not in their room. It's not in the house. So they had to have turned it in." And
Right.
they ended up finding a couple of my assignments in the teacher's desk that these were assignments that were marked as zeros.
You felt it was
Um,
targeted at you and it was not just like a teacher, like, faux
absolutely.
pas, like, oh, 'cause that happens to me sometimes where I'm like,
No,
"What? I don't know where this paper went."
I definitely, because it was multiple assignments and it
Got it.
wasn't just one time, it was
Got it.
multiple assignments. So I
Okay.
definitely felt that that was very
Target.
much targeted at me. Um, but yeah, and I in high school I had gone to the vocational school, and this
Mhm.
teacher is no longer there. But he was my instructor for my program, and same thing happened where my assignments went missing. I was in the law and public safety program, so we referred to it was very militaristic type,
Mm,
setup. So
mhm.
he referred to everybody by their last name, and he refused to call me by my last name. And he just really, like, just kind of like put me on spot for several things that were just like it was unnecessary. And I 100% believe that he was a much older white gentleman from a
Mhm.
different generation, and I
Mhm.
was who I am. And so
Yeah.
I think he very much discriminated against me. And
Mm.
I think at that time, I had enough um, courage to really just not care about,
Mm,
what he was doing or what he was saying or how he was treating me. And
mm,
I mean, I was a teenager, so I pushed back and I was quote unquote rebellious. Um, and so I would talk back to him in class
mhm.
and then he would stop talking to me. Um, but that was another experience in school with a teacher, with an instructor. I was being discriminated against because of who I am.
And that's
Yeah.
something just to keep in mind in general, because of course there's so many students and adults that experience
Hmm.
discrimination for various reasons, whether it's race, your sex, whatever it may be. But this is something maybe that teachers wouldn't necessarily pick up on,
Hmm.
or be
Yeah.
aware of within themselves
Hmm.
unless they're kind of asked to take a minute and reflect on that. Now, there's
Yeah.
also a lot of conversation, and I'm sure you've heard this or, taken part in the conversation yourself about the mental health aspect,
Hmm.
um,
Yeah.
of, that, people that are LGBTQ suffer from maybe mental health challenges or
Hmm.
things like that. I'm sure this is not new to you. Um, so how do you acknowledge or address that?
In my sophomore year, I was probably the most depressed I had ever been.
Okay.
Um, to the point where, like I wasn't really eating, I wasn't talking to people. I would just go in my room and be
Mm,
by myself when I got home from school. Um, and it was pretty dark. And then there was only one other time in my life, and this is after I left college. So I didn't complete college. I ended up withdrawing within the first semester because it was just so incredibly overwhelming. And that was a time in my life where I was starting to really go after um, what resources were available for me and start
mhm.
transitioning. And
Okay.
so that was a very fast paced, confusing time of my life. And I
Mhm.
sunk into a deep depression.
Mm,
Um, I think if people want to say that people who are in the LGBTQ plus community are mentally ill,
mhm.
I would say we're only mentally ill because of all the things that people who are outside of the community have done to us and
Mm,
have done against us.
mm,
And it is a result of feeling isolated, of feeling you're not accepted,
mhm,
unloved, not
mm,
wanted. Um, it's a result of us feeling like there's no place in this world for us and nobody is going to take us.
mm.
Um, so that would be my response to that. If somebody wants to say that people in
Yeah.
this community have mental health issues, it's because of outside um,
Influences.
influences. Yeah.
What are your plans for the future for yourself? Is this something that you talk about more openly now, or is this just something that you're still learning?
Oh, I think I will always be learning.
Mhm.
I do. One of my previous jobs was at Shake Shack, actually at the Bridgewater Mall. Um, and with my coworkers, I hadn't legally changed my name yet. So when I got hired, it was under my former name, and all my coworkers saw that my former name was Emily. And I would introduce myself as Zach. And I
Mhm.
had quite a few of my coworkers come up to me and be like, "Well, why is your name Zach?" And I would
Yeah.
explain to them, "Well, I'm transgender." And they're like, "Oh, wow." Um, and they would say, "Can I ask you questions? If I have questions about it." I'm like, "Absolutely. Please
Mm,
ask me your question. I don't care if you think your question is stupid or
mm,
irrelevant or ignorant or whatever. Ask your question. And if I am comfortable enough to give you an answer, I will give you an answer."
mm,
I've said that with everybody that I've come out with. I don't care if you think your question is stupid. I don't care if you think your question will offend me. If it does offend me, I will correct you and I will tell
mhm,
you the proper way that you should ask me that question.
mm,
Um, because I feel like if you want to know and you want to educate yourself, asking somebody, if you can ask somebody like myself, please do, because they will give you the most honest answer that they can if they feel comfortable enough giving you an answer. Just because I think I was better off working there if people understood the actual truth and didn't
mhm,
assume things about me.
mhm.
Um, and for me, I feel like that created a better work environment for me.
How has it been going through the world as Zachary now? Do you feel like being Emily, you were treated a certain way versus Zachary, or no?
Absolutely. I really realized what white male privilege was, and it was kind of very much in my face. And it was very strange, because I did nothing to earn that or deserve that, and I felt quite uncomfortable
So how
in
did you
that.
realize that privilege?
So I was working at Shake Shack. I was training two new employees to be on the cashier, on the register.
Mhm,
And these are two young Black women. And I'm
mhm,
like, make a, joke with them. Say like, oh,
mhm.
I really like your shirt. Or like, if they're
Yeah,
wearing a sports hat, be like, oh, did you see that game? Just converse with them.
yes.
And the two of them looked at me and they're like, we can't really do that. And I'm like, I don't understand what you mean. You can't
Mhm.
really do that. And I was like, just try it. Just try it once. And if you really feel uncomfortable with it, then you don't have to do it. And they were like, okay. So they tried it. And, one of them just asked this guy, like, how's your day? He was just like, good. Shot her down. Didn't continue this conversation. As opposed
Mm,
to when I'm talking to them and I'm like, how's your day? And they're like, oh, my day's great. And
yeah.
then they like I can start a conversation with them, and they very much could not start a conversation. Nobody wanted to start a conversation with them,
Wow.
and that was the moment that I was like, I have white male privilege. That is very weird, and I
Yeah,
felt very uncomfortable, and I really didn't know what to say to them in that moment because
that's the
they
reality.
were fully aware of
Yeah.
how that situation would play out, and I was not because I had never experienced male privilege and white male privilege before. That was a real eye opener to me. And I've noticed since then, there are a lot of things, there are a lot of doors that have been opened because when people look at me, I present as just a white straight male. And that's it.
Mm,
It's something that I try to always be aware of.
mhm,
Um, and if I can extend that same opportunity to somebody else,
mhm,
um, who would not have gotten that, opportunity if it were not to have been, because of the gender they were born in or this color of their skin,
mhm.
things like that. So it's it's it was just shocking.
We gotta unlearn everything we learned and then learn again.
Exactly. Yeah.
That's what this process is, I think, right?
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
thank you so much for your time, Zachary. I really appreciate it. I know this is
Yeah.
not an easy conversation. And as you said, you're being vulnerable about your experience. And I'm sure there's so much more to it you haven't even gotten
Hmm.
to, but I really appreciate it. And I'm sure this is going to open some eyes for some people. And I think that's good.
Well, thank you so much for holding
Of-
a space for me to speak about all
Absolutely. Was
this.
there anything else you wanted to say before we part ways?
Um, I don't know, just to anybody who's watching this, just to respect people and just be kind.
Thank you so
Thank you
much.
so much. Bye.
Bye.